this evening, and actually some of you may have already seen some of the longer seminars on Pluto into Aquarius and Saturn into Pisces. I'm going to try to capture what I believe are some of the main points of both of those for the purpose of our gathering here in Oracle, very appropriately named Oracle, Arizona. And what we're going to need to consider here this evening are actually four mysteries. We'll be discussing first Saturn and Pisces, and then we'll be following that by Pluto and Aquarius. And probably the longer section will be on Pluto into Aquarius, but I think there's some very important things to share about Saturn into Pisces. Now, Alan, did you have, I forgot to mention, the 6 timelines, is that at the beginning here? Okay, so at this point, so many astrologers are discussing these ingresses, but there aren't that many that are placing it within a much wider context, which I think is extremely important to do at this particular time. So yes, we have Pluto into Aquarius, every 248 years, right? Saturn goes into a different sign every 2.5 years. But this is not just any old time. We are now within a time frame which we refer to, it's why our school is named Turning of the Ages Mystery School, a time period between 1962 and 2034, which is the Great Turning in a 26,000-year cycle. But there's more to it than that. We have a whole thing tomorrow that also will be live streamed. It will be much more deeply into this, but I always like to put this up first. And this is some research that I've done recently, which shows how the astrological ages based on the 26,000-year cycle, the yugas, new research on the yugas, which dovetail almost precisely with a precessional cycle. Also geological time, also the precessional stars, and also the 5 suns. And in some of the more recent Toltec material, they say we from 2012 to 2021, we entered into the 6th sun. And in many ways, the 6th sun is the first sun. So they cycle through when they go through 5 and then they go to the 6th. So this is research that shows how the different ages connect with the yugas, and we are now at the bottoming out of the Kali Yuga. And there'll be more about that we'll discuss in our live stream tomorrow. But I always like to start any presentation currently with this larger context. Now, in discussing, our first topic will be Saturn into Pisces. So we're going to have to discuss a little bit how this school will view Saturn and Pisces. Now, while I'm describing this, we can have this next slide up. This is the ingress. I believe this, this is the entrance of Saturn into Pisces. Now that's the sun.
Let me have Saturn for you.
March 7th, 2023, this most recent ingress of Saturn into Pisces, which will be about a 2.5-year time frame. And you can unpack a lot in that chart. I'm not going to spend too much time on that at the moment. Why don't we go to the historical slide, and they'll give some background, some larger background on this, and then we can dive into Saturn and Pisces, the historical one. But we can, yes. So this is more recently, the dates when Saturn had ingressed into Pisces. And you can see there's one in 1817, 1847, 1876, 1905, 1935, 1964, 1993, and then 2023. In the In the video blog that I did with Mary Curran, we did go into some of the history on this, some of the main events that were happening during those time periods. But I wanted to provide that as a background so you can see the context of how often Saturn goes into Pisces, and it's based on the 29.5-year cycle of Saturn. So it's not that rare. It's not as rare as what we discussed with Pluto into Aquarius, but it is the one right smack in the middle of the great turning of the ages. What I'd really prefer here more to go into is to unpack the intent of Saturn into Pisces. So let's explore a little bit first about Saturn. So in our school, one of our major things that we like to talk about is how Saturn of the last 2,000 years is very different than what Saturn had been for, let's say, 100,000 years. And we have recently done some workshops on the patriarchal hijack of the planets. Maybe some of you have seen that. And so as I would perceive it, and that's something that we explore a lot in our school, prior to around 2,000, 3,000 years ago, all that Saturn symbolized was an operating manual of how to navigate 3D. So included in Saturn would be things like, don't jump off a cliff. There is gravity. Or don't stick your finger in a fire. So there's certain rules of engagement at a 3D level. We sometimes run into this with the Aquarius moon babies, they get up on the high chair and they think they can fly, right? So they discover no longer. So you get them into gymnastics, or they become aerialists, or ballet dancers. It's quite an often way to mitigate that problem. Also, over the last 100,000 years or so, Saturn also in the human dimension would represent maturation, stages of life, when physical maturation would happen, when perimenopause would happen, when menopause would happen, different stages of life. And you could actually apply Saturn to dogs also, or to animals. They have their own pattern, their own maturation cycles that can be based on Saturn also. In the human kingdom, I like to think of the archetypal lifespan of a human being as being 3 Saturn returns, or as the Etruscans looked at it, 90 years, a saeculum. The oldest elder would be about 90, and then they would see 4 generations that would turn over in 90 years, or 3 Saturn returns. But in the last few thousand years, certain thought forms, injections, viruses have been injected into Saturn. And most of them are based upon the doctrines associated with original sin. So then what got stuck into Saturn are things like deficiency, not okay. You better be better. You better be better than you are, because you were not okay to begin with. Much of that was captured by the artist William Blake with this really great painting called The Judgment of Adam, that shows this stern old man with a beard pointing at Adam with his head bowed in shame. And the finger is like pointing like not okay. And so that would include then things like guilt and shame and better be. So this, I like to think of it as 2 hoaxes that have been injected into Saturn. One is, we better be good. We better be motivated to be good because we used to be bad or deficient in some way. But there's another one, equally pernicious, which is the belief that if you were perfect, or if you did it really well, if you did it as good or better than dad, or whoever your authority figure is, that there would be an additional reward. That is a hoax. Injected into this also is what I like to call Christianized karma. Christianized karma, which is a hijack of the original Hindu version of karma. And if you talk to the original traditions of karma, they would easily state, unfathomable are the ways of karma. But the way we usually think of it, we got like a difficult Saturn aspect, or Saturn is in a particularly interesting, challenging position on the chart. And we're likely to not think of it, that way at all. It's like bad karma. We must be getting punished for having, been bad in that area of our life before. This is not useful, and we've kind of ignored, we've thrown out that understanding of it. So Christianized karma, which is part of Calvinism, actually, it's a kind of a deterministic system, is certainly not what we follow in this approach. So the Saturn ends up really, its essence, being a teacher. I recently gave a 10-week course for only individuals aged 27 to 46. And in that group, we were looking only at their Saturn, we started with the nodal reversal, and then we went to the Saturn return, the Saturn square, the Saturn opposition, and it was really interesting because actually the title of that 10-week seminar was Saturn the Liberator. Because if you can get what Saturn is really teaching, you're free of that deterministic thing about karma. It's a freedom from the determinism of karma. Now, I'm not trying to say here that from a millions of years perspective of the soul's journey, that there isn't some version of cause and effect. However, in the current lifetime, in any current lifetime, there's no linear connection between your goodness and what the return is. Pretty much any psychologist worth their salt has at some point in their life written a book called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? Jung wrote something about Job, the story of Job in the Bible and so on. So we are trying to look at Saturn in a very different way that is not based upon this patriarchal hijack. And when I talk about original sin, I've had conversations with people of Jewish background, and they'll say, we don't have original sin. And I'll say, yeah, but you do have guilt and shame, now, don't you? So yeah, it's all kind of woven together, but that's not original Saturn. Saturn is really just the outer boundaries of our 3D reality. And it's important to take teaching from Saturn. And whenever we reach boundaries with Saturn, in fact, I'll define our view of Saturn. Our view of Saturn is Saturn teaches us how to grow, change, and evolve via limitations and boundaries. So this came up, a few times already in our time together here, where if you keep hitting the wall, trying to make something happen that you think should happen based on your merit, but if you keep hitting the wall, then possibly Saturn is saying it's not intended to work that way. Go in a different direction. Saturn is a magnificent teacher in that. And I also think of Saturn as a maturation. So there's certain kinds of Saturn transits, like the ingress of Saturn into a new sign or a Saturn return on your individual chart, that is a time of maturation. So it's like graduating to another level of the intent of a 30-year time period. And that sometimes the graduation can be very black and white. That means, well, it seems like I'm just finished with that 30 years, so then you get to the next level or you change the game entirely at that point. So this is that's a revision of how we're looking at Saturn. So Saturn in its transit will have an intention. And here, what our conversation here is about Saturn moving into a new sign. where it'll be for 2.5 years, and in this case, Pisces. So what would Saturn's intent be to Pisces? Well, it depends on whether you use the patriarchal hijacked Saturn or whether you see it in this larger essence of what Saturn actually symbolizes in this larger sense. So we'll come back to that, but let's shift our attention to Pisces itself. In our school, we also have done a great deal of inquiry into what are the nature of the different mystery schools. So there's, for example, the view I hold is that many of the sun sign descriptions in popular culture tend to be the shadow of that mystery school and not its essence. And then we can get lost in those popular descriptions of the sign. Now, certainly, in looking at Pisces as a mystery school, one of the 12 mystery schools, I believe that its essence is like when great mystery, when Creator allocates essence to human beings. For example, Scorpio is allocated the strongest will. Pisces is allocated compassion. And each one of them has its own main essential quality. I like to think there are two sides to the mystery school of Pisces, and kind of the symbol, there's like two sides, right? One is the well-known characteristic of Pisces, which is to be able to sense into, to feel into, is better said, where grief, sorrow, suffering, and needs of others are, not just human beings, but all what in Buddhism are called sentient beings. And of course, the dominator cultures feel that only human beings are sentient, right? But actually, if you take it on a shamanic level, literally everything has consciousness, right? So Pisces tunes into that and can sense where there needs where there needs to be some kind of compassion there. It's also a giver mystery school. And the word self-abnegation very strongly goes with Pisces. That's the well-known side of it. I'll get to the shadow of that in a moment. The other side of it is this hunger, delight in expanded states of consciousness. Being able to get high on expanded, non-ordinary states of consciousness, which is why on a shadow side, Pisces is often perceived of as, alcohol problems and that kind of thing. This also, we have to remember that in many cultures, alcohol is called poor man's mysticism. And usually the Piscean type does not drink to escape, but to feel more, actually. And that which can actually, it's not a very good way to expand feeling, but poor man's mysticism, right? So, but then this includes other ways of expanding alternate expanded states of consciousness. So, certainly plant medicine would be considered connected to that, but also in spiritual traditions, Diksha, Bhakti, that rapture of being connected to the cosmic mother, not personal mother, but that Ananda aspect of the one reality that comes in three: consciousness, Ananda, and being. Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means wow, something. There's something rather than nothing. That's Sat, being, and then consciousness, which is the one reality, has awareness. And then the Ananda part, which is the one that's hardest to put into one word. They usually say bliss. But I think of it as the energetics, the felt energetics of love. I'm often reminded of one of my absolute favorite lyrics, a song I loved in 1966, a song named 5D. And the lyrics go, I opened my heart to the whole universe, and I found that it was loving. And I think that kind of captures that hunger in Pisces. And in fact, when people are in Neptune transits, that's often what the invitation is, to be able to trust that that is in fact possible. Now, so therefore, Pisces would represent feeling function. It's a giver energy. It's connected to the Ananda aspect of the one reality. What would its shadow be? Now, this is important relative to what Saturn is going to attempt to do when it is ingressing through Pisces. Nowhere in Pisces training is there anything about including yourself. So it's a no self mystery school, self abnegation. Actually, if I look back on my experience in the 60s and 70s, many of the trance channels were Piscean types. But that was a version of it where they gave up their bodies to the trance channel. And it was through the work of Seth and some of the later ones that this was changed around, that you don't go into that state with the trance channel unless it's helping you. So that whole, you just find one of the best ones I knew back in the late 60s, early 70s, she was great, but she was like 300 pounds and not healthy at all, because she was like taking on what she was helping people with, thinking it was her responsibility to take it on. So the solution there is to include yourself. You also are worthy of compassion, of love, of mercy. So what you're able to help others with, you get to be included, and that's one of the solutions to the shadow of it. I mean, the well-known other aspects, obviously what I'm talking about is victimhood, martyrdom, all of those kind of things that are associated with the shadow of Pisces. So what is Saturn doing going through Pisces? If it's the hijacked Saturn, you can think of Saturn as we have often been trained to think of it. Oh no, Saturn, restrictive and heavy and judgmental and bad karma and all the rest of it. Patriarchal Saturn does not want hearts open. It's actually basically that patriarchal version of Saturn is placing limitations around it. This is particularly the case for men who are trained in a patriarchal way with a lot of Pisces. It's not right for a man to be that way. It's too sensitive, too soft, and so therefore the actual essential strength of that man with Pisces is shut down. It's a judgment against being that soft or yin or empathic or giving or sensitive, and be considered to be more of a feminine quality. But nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, it's the actual strength of the male, it's Pisces, or in a Neptune transit, is this ability to care about others, and then also to have some compassion for himself. So that's one of the solutions, but the way I look at it is that the one thing patriarchal Saturn does not want to happen is for hearts to open. Now, this brings us to the nature of our times. What is usually required in order for hearts to open collectively? Usually it's a tragedy of some kind. Usually it's a hurricane comes through, or there's starvation or flooding or rain, flooding is, of course, a lot of people look at it quite literally, it's water sign, well, expect floods, that kind of thing. But the issue here would be is that when there are disasters, very often that's what gets hearts to open. Now, I personally, looking at it historically about the other things, other times in history when Saturn has been in Pisces, there have been off the scales wars. I mean, the greatest destruction of the American Indian Wars happened during Saturn through Pisces. I don't have that data here with me tonight. Again, want to reference the video blog we did. But literally every one of them, back to the early 1800s, was punctuated with major war scenarios. Saturn going into Pisces. Well, it's like the attempt to hold back hearts opening is not, you can't get away with it. So one way or another, hearts are going to open. But what will it take? What will it take, particularly in the Western world, so-called Western world, where training is more mind-based training. The elite get trained in their minds, not in their hearts. In fact, they're trained to not access the heart. So they're not really fully human from the sense of what genuine, authentic, full human being is. So again, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, our school does not predict happenings. We attempt to tune into what the intent is for the time period. So patriarchal Saturn is trying to hold that back. I personally think at the great turning of the ages, it will not succeed. But what will it take? Well, this then brings up the discussion regarding Kali Yuga and why I put that slide up. According to the doctrines that come from India, in Kali Yuga, 1/4 of the heart is open. In Sat Yuga, the entire heart is available. But if you look at that doctrine more deeply, I believe that I have some of those quotes when we do the Turning of the Ages presentation tomorrow. It's not that you only have 1/4 of your heart open. It's more like 3/4 of humanity doesn't, 1/4 does. Or to put it a different way, if you have your heart open in Kali Yuga, that is far more significant than having your heart open in Sat Yuga, because everybody does. There's no, the contrast in a time of great density allows a person to truly open their heart rather than this what everybody's experiencing. And I'm often reminded of a workshop that I went to 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. It was a workshop at the Lama Foundation in New Mexico. And it was co-taught by Ram Dass and Daniel Ellsberg, both born on the same day, the same year. Daniel Ellsberg was the political guy, that revealed the Pentagon Papers and we showed that, what the US government was up to in Vietnam. So he's still alive actually, but a heroic character. Ram Dass, most everybody here knows who he is. The name of the workshop is How to Keep Your Heart Open in Hell. And so one of the exercises that we did in the group, you'd be sitting, basic meditation practice, you'd be sitting together watching videos of hydrogen bombs going off and things being ripped apart, and just doing mantra, how to keep your heart open in hell. I believe that's something we need to know about when Saturn is going into Pisces. And actually we'll all have an opportunity in our life to have our hearts open up even more when particularly the time of such great bifurcation. And as we find the individuals in our life that we can compassionately help during a time of tragedies. I mean, that's just the nature of Kali Yuga. Steiner really described it quite well. He had a lot of Pisces and a lot of Saturn, which was that you have to have the quote sorrow or grief or suffering in order to be able to see clearly the other way. The contrast is necessary in order to claim the self. You know. Now, before we turn our attention to the much more talked about Pluto into Aquarius, I want to share. Did we lose it?
No, it is.
Oh, I wanted to share what my absolute favorite quote regarding Pisces. It's my all-time favorite Rumi quote. And it's deep. It's hard to get. I had to think about it a long time in order to fully get it. It's just so multi-layered in its connotation. Do I need to do something here?
Well, I gotta screen share it on Zoom first.
We are new at this. What I find interesting before we go to the next slide is March 2023 through May 2025 exactly corresponds to all these eclipses and the major events at the end of the fourth turning and the different things we'll discuss tomorrow along the timeline, because the fourth turning is also part of it. It's what happens at the end of a 90-year secular. Kali Yuga ends bottoming out in 2025, actually. Interesting. So here it is. I saw grief drinking a cup of cider, and I called out, "It tastes sweet, doesn't it?" "You've caught me," grief answered, "and you've ruined my enterprise. How can I sell sorrow when you know it is a blessing?" And so this is one of the things I learned when I was a student in the diamond art work, which is sorrow is and grief are as much essential states as joy. Because to be able to grieve means you've loved. And the great Native American teacher, Martin Prechtel, this is his whole teaching about grief, that to genuinely grieve, out of that comes art, beauty, and new life. So these are all Pisces teachings, which I think it's really important to keep in mind as Saturn is now during this end of the fourth turning and the real peak of the great turning that Saturn happens to be in Pisces. I'm willing to take any questions or discussion before we move ahead to Pluto into Aquarius.
Anybody have any questions? Point the microphone there.
Questions, comments, screams of outrage, anything. Is it understandable?
Yep. We also, Daniel, are able to get questions from people on YouTube, so
Okay.
feel free to address them as well.
Well, you're seeing it, not me.
Well, I'll ask questions.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Mhm. Is there anything coming in?
We just got a hi there, Carol from Vancouver Island, and Faye from Ontario, Canada.
We actually have a fair amount of Pisces in our group. We've been discussing the Pisces issue fairly often here in the last day and a half. You had one?
No, it's
Oh.
just Saturn.
Nothing coming in?
We have many blessings for your free resources, Carol Polo. Thank you, Carol.
Well, let's now move to Pluto into Aquarius. I have a lot more slides for this one. But we're going to do a very similar kind of thing. To first look at Aquarius and at Pluto and look at some of the history on it, and then try to get a sense of what the intent of the transit is. And boy, there are a lot of opinions on this one. I want to give you a little bit of backstory, so we'll go into Aquarius first. This may come up a little bit tomorrow when we talk about the turning of the ages, but it has to do with the whole hoary issue of the age of Aquarius. And the thing to most keep in mind here is in the context of our school, and most astrologers, I won't say all, but most astrologers do not get that the age of Aquarius issue has very little to do with the sign. It's a constellation. And so what will happen is that they will transpose what they believe to be true about the sign of Aquarius and say that's the characteristic of the age. Signs and constellations are different. What happens during a movement of the spring equinox, the March equinox into the water bearer, that's the age of Aquarius. And that's not the sign. That's a constellation that lines up with the March equinox. If we really go back far in history, to Sumeria and to Babylonia, Aquarius is a very ancient constellation. In fact, it was the constellation of Enki, later known as Ea, the Sumerian god of water. And he was the Sumerian, if you get into their mythology, is that when a great flood came, his brother wanted to destroy humanity, but it was Enki who saved humanity, because he believed that in the heart of humanity. And Enki is the god of water, and that was the constellation of Aquarius. And it's shown, and the way I like to look at these days is that the constellation is universal consciousness pouring water into humans. And it's in an area of the sky that's all water. In fact, under a very dark sky, it's an area of the sky that's like no other area of the sky. You can actually even see the stars that look like streams of water coming out of an urn. Water constellation. Now, Jung knew this. His last book, The Aeon, was about this issue, the constellation, and what it actually meant of the pouring of water into the fish's mouth. What happened is that when the Hellenistic culture invented the signs, separate from the constellations, very brilliant invention, they created a sign, unfortunately with the same name, confused a lot of people, and they gave air attributes to it. And there was still some of the connection to the water constellation, but in a new system of 12 by 30 signs based upon the equinoxes and solstices, not about the stars, they made it into an air sign. Yet the symbol, two waves, that's water. And I know there's been an attempt to turn it into electrical waves, but but this relates to also the technology issue and the hijack of Aquarius. This then So I guess what I'm trying to get across here is that there's a great misunderstanding about the age of Aquarius issue and even an understanding of the sign of Aquarius. So a little other, more backstory on this is that in the late 60s, which was a time period, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, that started with 7-planet conjunction in Aquarius in 1962, which is actually the date that I began the Great Turning Act, 1962. I one time was invited into a library to look at a library of this elderly woman I knew 30 years ago in Nevada City, and she had all these books from the 1920s. We're entering into the age of Aquarius, the 1920s, in the late 1800s, entering into the age of Aquarius, and so then so I have this whole article I wrote called, it was a video blog. The age of Aquarius, what again? So it's actually, we're in a zone where the March equinox is moving into the water barrier. But the Aquarius, back in the late 60s, we never thought of it as collectivism, the Borg, hive, no individuality, because I think we were Pluto and Leo generation. And Pluto and Leo generation was completely, you have to, when you think of Aquarius sign, you have to think of its opposite. They work as a resonant polarity. You can't have Aquarius without Leo. You can't have Leo without Aquarius. And it's Leo, it's about sovereignty and autonomy. And then Aquarius is the collective sign that, strangely enough, Aquarius is also about uniqueness and individuality. So they both are kind of operating together like that. But today, the modern astrologers don't remember that part. And so I know this fairly well-known astrologer who wrote an article called, "Oh, Pluto in Aquarius, power to the people." You really want that? I mean, that's what happened in the French Revolution. So basically the mob rule is what our founding fathers in the US warned against. That is to say, democracy, the rule of the majority, which is an Aquarian hijack, part of the Aquarian hijack. They did not create a democracy; they created a representative. So word I'm looking for. You all know what I'm talking about. Anyways, not when the people say that we have a democracy, it was never intended to be democracy. I mean, even the Greeks knew democracy could only work if it was just a small group of individuals and not everybody. So we combine the sovereignty together with the collectivity, which is one of the things I try to remind people about. Otherwise, we just get swallowed up into the hive, the Borg. And our school definitely stands for the sovereignty and autonomy of the individual. And every spiritual teacher I've ever been influenced by says that evolution happens in the individual, not in the group. Otherwise, there's this thing called the egregore, which is an energy that happens through the mob. Actually, the Nazi phenomenon was from the egregore. There was no more individual reference point. The conscience was lost and was surrendered into that group energy that came from the mob, the collective. So you have to remember the sovereignty part of it when we're talking about the sign, and not just the collective aspect of it. So this then brings in then what would be the shadow of Aquarius. So just a little backstory on this. Because of the glamour that was associated with the age of Aquarius in the late 60s, I would go to the astrology groups. I would hear the different talks. And Aquarius was the glamour sign. Everybody wanted to be Aquarius. And, in those sort of popular culture kinds of approaches, certain signs were also denigrated. So if you had Virgo, you'd be ashamed to admit it, Oh, poor Virgo. Today, in mainstream astrology, guess what sign is the one that's most denigrated? All the time. Libra. Poor Libra. It's considered to be ultimately impossibly codependent. And it's very much judged against, and and I try, of course, counter to that. But back in the 70s, I used to tell jokes about the shadow of Aquarius. So they were getting away scot-free, you know. So I would say to the audience, "What is the shadow of Aquarius?" And what I was trying to get at was the shadow of Aquarius is that they don't believe there is one. That is its shadow, right? So that's that sort of light polarization and spiritual bypass and light washing that can happen with that. I also, at one point, it's kind of a joke, very few got it. At one point, someone did. Why do the Aquarians believe in universal and unconditional love? Answer: because it's a good idea. And well, by whatever means you might take to get to it is fine. But many other people, it's not through the mind you get there. Yeah. So then we find 2.5 years where Saturn was moving through Capricorn in preparation for, basically Saturn and Pluto, in Capricorn, in preparation for this Aquarian time. What is the intent? Well, certainly Saturn in Aquarius, that's about turning everything into data, turning everything into bits and bytes. It's about basically the mesh around the earth. The internet consciousness. Obviously, there's some value to that, but when you're harvesting data and turning everything into silicon, then it's no longer fully human. Fully human is carbon-based, but even more than that, water-based. And this brings us back to Aquarius, because it's actually the crystalline structure of water can evolve. Silicon can only be programmed. And that's what really makes a full human being, because we're water, we're mainly water, and of course carbon-based. So the attempt to wipe out what it is to be an authentic human 1.0. This character Yuval Harari, the favorite philosopher of Klaus Schwab, he writes a book called Homo Deus, which is basically the next stage of humanity as humans become gods. Now this then brings us to what links Pluto and Aquarius together. And it's a word that I think captures the essence of both of them on their shadow side. And that word is hubris, Hubris. And in the original Greek understanding, hubris was humans overstepping their boundaries and trying to be gods. That was hubris. And in more recent times, it means arrogance or overweening pride. Well, Zeus, after Prometheus, stole the fire. And we could say Prometheus is the first technologist, bringing fire to humanity. Zeus says to Prometheus, "Good on you, Prometheus. You got the fire now. Beware of two things, hubris and forgetting about justice." It was a warning from Zeus. And so actually we have here again with Pluto about to go into Aquarius after Saturn and Pluto had been in Capricorn. We have the return of the exact same predicament that happened in Atlantis. And a lot of the technologists that are here running the different systems, the satellites, Silicon Valley and everything else, I think they're coming back to try to succeed with what it is they didn't succeed before. Imprisoning authentic humans with open hearts. We're here, of course, to counter that. Or even if we have to do it in a parallel society. So, I mean, that's, this is, by the way, recently there was a summit called the Aquarian High Council that they invited me on. It was all the renegade astrologers, the ones that were not going along with the agenda, you know, and so we all got together and had a few days of talks. That was actually quite exciting. Even though there's a bit too much among the younger ones, still a glamour about Aquarius, not really wanting to look at the shadow side of it. So the shadow side of it is the going totally into silicon and into collectivism, in my view. And even this whole concept of what would you call it? I think it's called these days the greater good. My God, I was a philosophy major in the late 60s, and in the philosophy department, utilitarianism was completely debunked. It was just, you know, there was no one who took utilitarianism seriously. And here it is now. I mean, it's that's the main philosophy of the elite, as it were, greater good, as long as they're the ones running the show. Anyway, so Pluto. What is Pluto's job in all this? We could say, what is Pluto's intention? The word that I'm liking to use these days for Pluto is composting. Composting. In fact, this was suggested actually way back in the 70s by Liz Green. She said, when you want to think about Pluto, think of two things: rich, moist, dark soil and running sewers. Then we have the sense of Pluto. Pluto is organic, but it's not associated with the human kingdom so much. And so I think Pluto has also been hijacked. I mean, originally the Plutonian essence was female. It was the underworld goddesses. It was Kali, and it was aspects of Shakti. It was Durga. It was Sakati. It's the underworld dark goddesses. That Ereshkigal. I mean, basically, when Inanna goes to the underworld, she visits Ereshkigal as a Plutonian descent. The brothers. You know, Zeus allocates the world to the brothers, so we get Hades. You know, that's not the original understanding of the underworld dimension. So the purpose of Pluto is to naturally compost what needs to be composted, if you can put it that way. And out of compost comes new life. If for a long period of time, you know, they would always give to Pluto the imagery of death, you know, like a phoenix connected with Scorpio, you know, death and rebirth, right? But I'm looking at it in a more organic sense, you know, where you compost something and then out of that comes new sprouts, new life. It's in my own life, I've made probably every possible mistake regarding Pluto. In fact, back in the 80s, I was known as a Pluto Pollyanna, because I would get a chart of somebody with strong Pluto transit, and I would say, oh, you have a remarkable opportunity for transformation. But then through my own experience, you know, I then became more and more aware of what, you know, Pluto is actually doing. So this brings up an interesting question. It's actually on our exam for people who are getting certified in the school. The question is, what is the essential difference between a Saturn initiation and a Pluto initiation? I've gotten some very creative answers to that question, but I almost never get what I'm looking for. The essential difference is with Saturn, you can figure it out. There's a rational basis to it, even if you don't like what you figured out. It's not fair, or, you know, I was good. Why did it happen like that? But if you can, in the mind, you can figure it out. Not so with Pluto. Pluto is irrational. Back in the 80s, we used to have a T-shirt that for Pluto that said, "Give chaos a chance." And so chaos, conditions beyond our control, irrational events. A good example of this would be those old nature videos where you might have like a leopard or a cheetah going across the Serengeti, and it catches an elan or a wildebeest and crushes the skull and the blood is spurting. Saturn looks at that and says, "This is just wrong. It shouldn't be allowed," right? Pluto, what are you? This is just the way it is. This is nature, you know. So hubris even comes in when we say that the end times of some kind, whether it's the sixth mass extinction, or whether it's the end of Kali Yuga, or whether it's the great turning of the ages, or whether it's the end of the fifth sun, it's hubris even to say we're responsible for it. Or it's only us that can save it. You know, this like making the human, you know, the main issue when it's really nature and long cycles and things that might have nothing really, I won't say nothing to do with humans, but to say that it's only about humans, that's a hubris. So let's like illustrate this with some of these slides, and you can get a better picture of what I've been talking about here. You can get those. Did somebody have a laser? Find a laser?
Yeah, super high power one. Or that could be too much.
Whose was that?
For our next guy.
Oh, you made it. You got it to work.
Yeah.
How did you do that? This is fantastic.
Wow. That's the one I brought.
This is the one I brought.
No, that's the one I brought.
It was the same. It's the same model.
I have lesson too. You just screw the cap off so it doesn't give you all that funky light show stuff.
All right. Thank you. That'd be somebody who knows. Okay. Let's.
I did not. Maybe the power on the projector hit that one.
Yeah.
That's we've got Liz London joining us, Kimberly Madden. No questions, but thank you, Daniel. This is wonderful. And Liz, thank you so much for this video. I'm so grateful to be able to watch and learn. Kimberly, you have about a 30-second delay.
So here's the ingress. But you know what we forget sometimes about is that Pluto is only just dipping the edge of its toes into Aquarius, and it's going to go back for many months into Capricorn. So it's just a little taste of the composting, and then next year fully into Aquarius for the next 20 years. Right, so that's the chart. You have that for reference. It even has still the Mars and Gemini. By the way, we'll have another live stream in a few days, which will be on the eclipses, but it's also going to be looking at the US chart. You know, the Pluto return on the US chart, the Chiron return on the US chart. So that's still to come. Okay, continue. I just, for reference, I put the one in it for 1777. Go to the chart historically, if you can find that one. So this this is really interesting to see the pattern. So these are the Pluto dates of when Pluto, the time we're in now, 2023 to 2044. You see how rare it is. 1777 to 1798. Anyone who still knows history knows what that time period was. You know, it was a very revolutionary time period, at least in the so-called Western world. Then before that, it was 1532, 1286, and you can do really interesting historical research on this. And I've also put in there the dates of the perihelion, because like Pluto has a very eccentric orbit. Sometimes it actually comes in closer than Neptune. 1989, it was closer than Neptune. I was 41 at that point. So I like to think of myself as and you were very close to that same time period. You know, we were the Pluto generation, I would say. Well, here are the dates of the perihelions. That means when Pluto is closest to the Earth and closest to the Sun. And its long elliptical orbit. I'll give you an example. I reached Pluto square Pluto at age 41. If someone was born in the year 1800, the square didn't happen until age 89. If you're born in the year 1900, it happened at age 65. So there's certain generations where it's very speeded up. Now think about that for a moment. I consider the Pluto square Pluto aspect in a person's life to be just hugely significant. It's like you may not have other strong Pluto in your chart, but everybody's going to go through the Pluto square sitting in this room. If they're not already gone through it, they will soon. Pluto square Pluto. But at 1800, it didn't happen until age 89. In 1900, not until age 65. But if you're looking at the overall pattern, the perihelion, 1989, and the whole pattern stays the same, which is that the Pluto in Aquarius generation is 30 to 40 years after the perihelion, which I think is a very interesting historical pattern. That Pluto composting Aquarius happens 2 generations after it comes closest. Now, there's some of the work I've done on this in the past. You find that people like the so-called great explorers, European explorers. Columbus sailed at his Pluto square Pluto. Which is really intriguing when you think of the implications of that. The results of that journey decimated 90% of the population of South America and Central America. So this is the historical pattern on it. And I took it back to 917 BC. And you can see the perihelion kind of recesses a bit. So you might also get a sense of why it is that most astrologers would say the quote ruler of Scorpio is Pluto, because the perihelion is happening at least all the way back to the year 1000. It's always in Scorpio. That's the closest path. Pluto's closest approach to the Earth and the Sun is either in late Libra or Scorpio. It's precessing. So the next one that happens in 2069 is 19 Scorpio. And that'll happen a little later than age 41. How many here, is there anybody here that's not been through their Pluto square?
Almost there.
Presently.
Not quite.
Presently.
Oh, you're in it now. That's right.
Yeah.
All the rest of us have survived it.
That's really, it was like 36.
So let's check this next one out. You had it at 36?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the earliest I've ever seen. The earliest possible was the last few months of age 35. So now here we have another thing to understand about Pluto, which is how long it stays in each sign. So the shortest is Scorpio. It was in Scorpio only 12 years, and then it kind of stretches out. So Sagittarius is 13 years, Capricorn 16, Aquarius 21 years. And you can see it stays in Aries and Taurus and Gemini the longest. My parents' generation were Pluto and Cancer generation. And you know, since we're speaking of Pluto by sign is exposing where the shadow of the sign is. Okay. So I was like, almost might sound like I was bragging about being Pluto and Leo, you know, because we remembered that it connects the sovereignty to the Aquarian part, right? We sure had our shadow. I swear, in our generation, if we had Facebook, we would have been worse. It's, you know, the me generation, you know, the shadow of it is the me generation, you know, even though the positive side of it is, you know, individuality and sovereignty and enlightenment and personal, that kind of stuff, right? But it had its shadow, which is the which ended up becoming the 50-50 split, even in that generation. Like most of our so-called leaders today are Pluto and Leo generation people, you know, and yikes, you know, it's I heard this once that this is a strange digression, but bear with me from my generation. There was a show that was very influential in the 60s. It was the original Twilight Zone. And it is said that there was a certain episode. If you had seen that episode, you would have ended up being liberal. If you had not seen that episode, you would have become conservative. And about 50% of the population saw that episode. You know, it's only 3 stations, you know. Twilight Zone was quite popular. Remember that? Do you remember the show?
Oh, I certainly remember the show.
The episode was that one where there's a woman in bandages. In the whole show, you just say, oh, this is the last chance we're going to ever change your face, you know, and it's been horrible for you. And there's bandages all over her face. And at the very end, you never see the stack, right? And so they finally unwrap her face. And she's just a normal looking, good looking woman. And oh no, it didn't work. And she's just like so ashamed, you know. And then you look at the nurses, and they all have just these deformed masks. Every one of them looks exactly the same. And so then, oh, we have to send you away to the colonies where all people like you are. You know, no, don't send me there. I want to be like everyone else, you know. And so it's called The Eye of the Beholder. Very worthwhile seeing, very life-changing episode. Actually, I saw it when I was 12. Anyway, back to this one. So you can see that Pluto by sign is not always the same amount of time. What this does, and it's beyond the scope of our conversation tonight, but I might be able to get into it later. I've been very influenced by a non-astrological book called The Fourth Turning that takes the saculum idea of 4 generations every 90 years or so, and then comes up with different generations. Actually, becoming aware of this helped me get over my grief in the 60s and early 70s, when I thought very naively that what we were going through was going to really completely change the world. And I realized that it was really the nature of the generations, that just naturally over hundreds of years, the generation that follows, I was in a second turning, that generation has a different characteristic than the one that follows it. You know, and this goes back all the way through history. And this is comparing Pluto by sign with major events, the event dates, and whether it was the fourth, first, second, third, fourth, first, second, third, fourth turning. And so this generation, the millennial crisis, 2008 to 2025, is the fourth turning. And at the very end of the fourth turning. So other fourth turnings were the Civil War, Great Depression and World War II, and then the so-called millennial crisis. And the people who wrote that book named the generations. They were the ones that named the millennials, the authors of that book. I have decided to name, this is my name for the generation born 2000 to 2020. I call them the iGen. You get the joke.
With a capital G.
iGen, the I generation. I, meaning
Yeah.
iPhone.
Oh, yeah, but I can't.
Which one?
Well, if I were written, I would have capitalized the G after the I, just to make.
It is.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I can't see
And
it.
then he's named the certain name to the different generations. There's a prophet generation, nomad, hero, artist. And then nobody knows what the prophet generation, the next prophet generation is going to be. Are they going to be the AI generation, or are they going to be something different? So anyway, this matches the Pluto stuff, which is why I put it up there. What came next after this? Is there anything that might be useful before we complete this? Is that do I have other stuff up there? Pluto signifies the shadow and also the inversion of the sign's essence. We talked about this earlier. So here for Leo would be sovereignty. The shadow would be no self-love or self, or the huge ego and self-importance. For Virgo, discrimination would be the essence. Perfectionism or obsessive discrimination or obsessive compulsive would be the inversions. Libra, personal essence. Shadow and inversion, codependence or purely mentalizing the person. Scorpio is will. Wrong use of will and ruthless control, the inversion. And then the essence of Sagittarius is truth. And so anybody who's had Pluto go over their Sag rising know what this is like. So the shadow of Sagittarius, fear that there is no truth or fundamentalism. Capricorn, knowledge, essence. Know-it-alls or hierarchical control through knowledge and materialism, which should be the shadow and the inversion. And each one of them would apply to what can happen. Like with Cancer, the Pluto and Cancer generation, caring. They gave us the welfare state, and there was a certain communitarianism that happened in the late 30s after the Depression. But then it's like obsessive caring with attachment, overgiving, and clannishness. We're number one, which is the shadow of that generation. So I thought that was a useful way of also seeing how Pluto intention when it goes through a sign. And what's the next one? Is there another one? Okay, good. All right. So just to reiterate here, we're not trying to predict. We do look at history to get clues. But more than anything, our job as totems and shamanic astrologers is to try to discern what the intent is. But even more than that, in ceremony, or as Steiner once said, if you have 50 or 60 people that are really together in the mystery school, you can change the world. It doesn't require large numbers. So you have a consistent focus on imagining the world we want, but at the same time not being adverse to the reality in front of us. And if we have to build a parallel culture, then we do that. We support each other through recognizing our basic humanity. The intention, I guess, of Pluto in Aquarius, I believe, is to ultimately, and this is maybe a hopeful thing I can say, I cannot imagine with Pluto in Aquarius that the metaverse can succeed. That the harvesting of data is going to create cyborgs that will end up, eliminating authentic human beings. I cannot believe that it could possibly succeed. And in fact, Pluto is a natural force. I think it might not be easy. It might take a lot of years in order to compost this inversion at the end of Kali Yuga, but we can also look at it historically and say it was bound to happen. I mean, Steiner predicted it in the early 1920s. It's amazing what he saw coming. And he said it would be in about a century. He pretty much named the time period where this would be happening like it is. Pretty remarkable, actually. Even wrote about that there would be vaccines that would disconnect people from spirit. He put that in his writings in the early 20s, actually. Anyway, I have one more thing that I want to share about this, which is maybe just to put it on the table, right? I mean, since we are talking about Pluto here, this actually came from someone named Shunyamurti. He was talking about the dance of Shiva and Shakti. And he was talking about Kali Yuga. And what he said in his understanding of the story, he said one aspect of Shakti, not the one I usually talk about. Usually I speak about that as the scorpionic version of the goddess, the active force of the sacred feminine, right? But there's another, you could think of Shakti also as the goddess herself. She is the earth god, represents the natural living creation, Shakti, feminine creation, female creation. She has an agreement with Shiva. The agreement that she has with Shiva is that if she, Shakti, can't be healthy, can't be in her vitality, in her aliveness, in her vibrancy, in her health, her agreement with Shakti, with Shiva, is that Shiva will destroy it. Which is an agreement with Shakti that would have to happen if she gets too sick. And he brings that forth as something at least to be aware of. So we don't know what's going to happen. And as a kind of a final thing here, while it's been mentioned a few times by others, when hearing something like this, and this has not been a love and light presentation at all, I mean, these are heavy duty ingresses, and it's the middle portion of the turning of the end, the middle portion of the great turning of the ages. People will say, what do we do? The best thing we can suggest in this school is the three worlds approach. No matter what is happening, try as best as we can to remember the three worlds. There is the celestial world, and from the celestial world, if we're only there, all is well, the universe is unfolding as it should. And besides, the material world doesn't have any basis anyway. It all just rises and falls. The self is empty, and so on. From the middle world perspective, it's what we're actually experiencing, what we see around us, the so-called real world, the objective reality. And you can look at that positively or negatively. I mean, the reality is in the middle world, there is enough knowledge, enough technology that can make the world work for everyone. That's the truth. And in the meanwhile, the oceans are, how much plastic are in the, I don't know, I could go on and on about the 100 different things that would make Shakti very unhappy right now. And then the third world is the underworld. And the underworld is basically annihilation, can happen in any instant. And so how are we with our higher self? Because I one time read that this one scientist came up with a formula. He showed his advanced formulas that proved that the universe we're in could wink out at any instant. So all three worlds at once, if you can do that. But of course, the thing that complicates it is that some person might be more in the middle of the world, more in a celestial, more in an underworld at a particular time period. So it's very important, I think, to be able to maintain the objectivity that there are those three. Even in your Pluto, it doesn't go on forever. There's a beginning and an end to it, and another side when it's over. Any questions? Comments? Feedback? Check the live stream.
Roxanne says, thank you, Daniel. So special to hear and learn from you. Kavita joined us, saying hi. Thank you.
Who?
Kavita,
Oh, all right. Yes.
if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the chat on YouTube or anybody.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The relevance of Aquarius from the electric waves and the digital world coming, can Pluto take it back to the real consciousness, watery?
I mean, this could be just my projection, but it would seem to me Pluto has absolutely no concern one way or another, for what humans are attached to, and if the sun is being dimmed, the geoengineering is going on so extremely that masks and plastics keep being dumped into the ocean, and GMOs take over natural plants and so on. I would think that Pluto, in service to Shakti, is going to do something about it. What could that be? I mean, could it be a micronova? Could it be I even sometimes get these days into the expanding Earth theory. That there's been various times in history where the Earth is a living being, and at various points she expands. That's exactly how it happens with the continents. Moving apart. It's because the Earth used to be smaller, and it grows at various points. And maybe it could happen that way.
And the flip side of Saturn and Pisces and Pluto and Aquarius together.
Pardon me?
I said the flip side of it with Saturn and Pisces and Pluto and Aquarius could be a pretty epic story.
Yeah.
If it all worked out.
It's pretty interesting. Yeah, so it will go into the creation tales that the survivors will tell in the future, Yeah, so I'm actually counting on Pluto to have it in your control,
There's some idea about this. That is giving water, and she has a serpent on the head, and
I know maybe John knows about that. I'm less familiar about mine.
Yeah. And she giving birth at the same time, so she has all the knowledge, and is giving it, and is giving birth to new life.
That might be something you can bring to us in your research. Share that with us. Yeah, I'm less familiar with that actually. All right. Anything else? It's been a very interesting and action-filled days with Was this the first?
Full day.
Many wondrous events, and John, you were certainly part of that, and oh my gosh, Mariana showing up is really such a star, you know, so. Thanks for everyone being present with everything and being part of this. And pursuing advantage or not? No. Let's get our folks.
Just giving everybody a taste of what our live events look like.
Nice. Yeah. Well, we have another couple coming up, you know, there's one tomorrow and we have an amazing presentation by Gemini Brett coming up. And something on the eclipses coming up. So a lot of good things to come for those who were not able to be with us in person. Thanks for tuning in.